Drake just got stabbed in the back by his own circle. 21 Savage dropped a statement that torched everything Drake built. The Super Bowl moment exposed it all. This whole war just turned nuclear, and the most devastating blow came from inside his camp. The internet is spinning because what just got revealed changes everything about this feud. Everybody thought they knew the full story about the Drake and Kendrick beef. Drake versus Kendrick, two titans, a lyrical war for the crown. That was the version everyone repeated. The rap purists versus the hitmakers, the culture versus the charts. But now, 21 Savage, a man positioned as Drake's trusted ally, just dropped a statement that got the whole narrative twisted. He didn't just comment on the beef, he reframed the entire war, declaring that Drake would have been the villain even if he won. Not controversial, not debatable, doomed. That single line detonated a narrative bomb, suggesting the battle was rigged against Drake by culture itself. And the fallout is massive. Let me break this down, because what just happened is insane. In a moment that shocked hip-hop watchers everywhere, 21 Savage sat down and delivered what looked like support, but was actually a brutal psychological dissection of Drake's entire position in this war. He said, and I quote the essence of this, that Drake would have lost even if he won. Read that again. Not it would be tough, not people might disagree, but doomed from the start. That statement torched Drake's credibility in ways that even Kendrick's disses couldn't fully accomplish, because this wasn't coming from an enemy. This was coming from someone inside the circle, someone who's supposed to have Drake's back, and that makes it 10 times more devastating. Now, let's talk about what really happened here, because the surface level is just the beginning. Behind the scenes, commentators and insiders have been ripping the mask off, exposing what many feared but few dared to say out loud. This wasn't honesty, this was emotional damage control. This was the kind of lie you tell a fallen king to keep him from breaking down completely. The kind of statement you make when you know the truth is too brutal to speak directly. Think about it. When someone tells you you were going to lose anyway, what they're really saying is, don't feel bad about losing because you never had a chance. That's not support, that's psychological resignation dressed up as comfort. And the internet caught it immediately. Fans online turned into investigators, dissecting every word of 21 Savage's statement like they were on some CSI mission. They started analyzing the timing, the phrasing, the delivery, and folks online swear this was a coordinated move to soften the blow of Drake's collapse while simultaneously distancing 21 from the wreckage. But it gets even crazier. Let's talk about the Super Bowl moment, because this is where everything converges into one massive cultural execution. As Kendrick Lamar's diss thundered through the Super Bowl stadium, echoing across the world's biggest stage, Drake wasn't just defeated, he was publicly stripped of cultural power in front of millions. The entire world heard it, the entire world cheered it, and according to insiders, that moment hit different. Not just competitively, not just professionally, but psychologically, historically, permanently. TMZ and social media erupted with reactions. Clips of the performance went viral instantly, racking up hundreds of millions of views within hours. People weren't just watching, they were celebrating, they were memeing, they were declaring a victor with a finality that felt almost ceremonial. This wasn't just a performance, this was a coronation for Kendrick and a public funeral for Drake's claim to the throne. Online detectives found every angle, every reaction shot, every commentary piece. They slowed down frames, zoomed in on faces in the crowd, compared crowd energy levels, and the consensus was unanimous. Kendrick didn't just win a battle, he won the entire cultural war on the biggest platform in the world, and Drake had no response that could match that magnitude. The narrative turned vicious after that. Suddenly, Drake wasn't framed as a warrior fighting for respect. He was painted as a bully, an oppressor, a man who tore down a good guy who minded his business. Kendrick became the righteous underdog defending his honor, and Drake became the villain who picked a fight he couldn't finish. That's a dangerous narrative shift, and it happened fast. And here's where 21 Savage's comments become even more destructive. By saying Drake was doomed even if he won, 21 essentially validated that narrative. He confirmed what the culture was already whispering, that Drake was never supposed to win this fight, that the rules were set against him from the start, that even victory would have been reframed as villainy. It's a level of psychological defeat that goes beyond the music. Reports say that Drake's team has been scrambling to manage the fallout. Multiple sources suggest that the inner circle is in chaos, trying to figure out how to respond without making things worse. Some insiders claim there's been tension brewing for months, with people afraid to tell Drake the hard truths about how this battle was being perceived. And now that lack of honesty has resulted in a catastrophic miscalculation. Let's keep it real. The evidence is piling up that this wasn't just a rap beef that went wrong. This was a systematic dismantling of Drake's cultural authority brick by brick, diss by diss, moment by moment. And the final blow came from the enemy, not from the friend who told him the fight was unwinnable all along. Fans swear the 21 statement was the confirmation everyone needed that Drake's camp knew this was a losing battle, but let him fight it anyway. Whether out of loyalty, fear, or profit, they let him step into an arena where the culture had already decided the outcome. And that's messed up on a level that goes beyond music. That's betrayal disguised as brotherhood. Now, let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place like a puzzle you didn't even know you were solving. Why would 21 Savage make a statement like that? Why now? Why phrase it that way? To understand this, we need to go deep into the history between these camps, the power dynamics at play, and what's been brewing under the surface for years. First, let's talk about Drake's position in hip-hop. For over a decade, Drake has been the undisputed king of commercial success. Streams, untouchable. Chart dominance, unmatched. Cultural influence, massive. But here's the thing that's been lurking in the shadows the entire time. The question of whether commercial success equals lyrical respect. And that question has haunted Drake throughout his entire career. Think about it. Drake went from pulling in record-breaking numbers, dominating every chart, setting streaming records that seemed impossible to break, to now being in a position where his own allies are publicly questioning whether he could ever win a cultural battle. That's not just a career shit. That's a fundamental reframing of his entire legacy. Back when he was at his peak, people say Drake was the untouchable giant of hip-hop. Every release was an event. Every feature was a cosign that could change careers. Every strategic move seemed to work perfectly. But now, in the aftermath of this Kendrick war, the cracks are showing. The vulnerabilities are exposed, and the narrative has shifted from Drake the conqueror to Drake the overextended. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar has positioned himself as the purist, the artist, the man who doesn't chase numbers but creates art. He drops when he wants, says what he wants, and the culture bows. That's a level of respect that Drake, despite all his success, has never fully achieved in the eyes of the hardcore hip-hop community. And that's the key to understanding why 21's statement hits so hard.
When 21 Savage said Drake would have been the villain even if he won, he was speaking to a deeper truth about how hip-hop culture perceives authenticity versus commercialism. He was acknowledging that Drake, no matter how many hits he makes, no matter how many records he breaks, will never be seen as the righteous warrior in a battle against a figure like Kendrick. The culture has decided that Kendrick represents purity and Drake represents compromise. Fair or not, that's the reality. And it gets worse for Drake when you look at the history. Remember the Pusha T situation? That was brutal. Pusha exposed personal information, dropped a diss that's still considered one of the most devastating in modern hip-hop, and Drake's response was to fall back, to go quiet, to let it fade rather than engage further. At the time, people debated whether that was strategic wisdom or a sign of defeat, but now, in hindsight, it's being resurrected as evidence of a pattern. Lose, avoid, suppress, control the narrative. And critics say the cycle is repeating with Kendrick, except this time the public sees it. That kind of fall off in perception hits different. It's not about sales. Drake's still selling. It's about authority. It's about whether the culture trusts you as a warrior or sees you as a businessman playing warrior. And the evidence suggests the culture has made its choice, and it's not in Drake's favor. Put all that together and you start to see why 21 Savage's comments feel less like support and more like a public acknowledgement of Drake's limitations. It's the friend who tells you you were never going to win that fight after you've already lost. It's too late to be helpful, but it's perfectly timed to distance himself from the wreckage. Some insiders whisper that 21's statement was actually a protective move. By framing Drake's loss as inevitable, he's setting up a narrative where Drake can save face. It wasn't your fault, the game was rigged, you never had a chance. But here's the problem. That narrative only works if people believe it. And right now, the internet is reading it as confirmation of Drake's inadequacy, not absolution. Industry voices are now pointing to a bigger issue, the yes men problem. Sources suggest that Drake's inner circle is filled with people who won't tell him the hard truths, people who tiptoe around his ego, people who validate every decision even when it's clearly a mistake. And that's created an echo chamber where missteps multiply unchecked, strategies backfire unnoticed, and by the time someone like 21 speaks up, it's too late. The damage is done. This isn't just speculation. There are patterns here. Every major Drake controversy follows a similar trajectory. Initial confidence, public backlash, delayed response, narrative control attempt, eventual fade out. It worked before because Drake's commercial dominance was so overwhelming that cultural criticism couldn't dent his success. But this time, the Super Bowl moment was too big, the Kendrick victory was too definitive, and the cultural rejection was too loud to ignore or outlast. And let's talk about what that Super Bowl moment really represented. It wasn't just Kendrick performing. It was the culture making a statement. It was millions of people simultaneously deciding this is our champion and this is our villain. Drake wasn't there physically, but he was omnipresent in that moment. Every bar Kendrick spit was a dagger aimed at him. Every cheer from the crowd was a repudiation of him. And that's what 21 was acknowledging, that even if Drake had won by some technical metric, the culture had already chosen Kendrick as the hero of this story. The bigger conversation now is about what this means for Drake's future. Can he recover from this? Can he rebuild his cultural capital? Or is this the moment where he transitions from being a legend to being a relic? Those are the questions swirling around right now, and 21 Savage's comments have only made them louder. But here's the part that really hits different, and this is where the story shifts from strategic commentary to something deeply personal. This isn't just about Drake losing a rap battle. This is about a man who spent years building an empire, cultivating relationships, creating a legacy, and now watching it all get questioned in the most public way possible. And the people who were supposed to protect him, the people who were supposed to fight for him, are the ones delivering the most devastating blows. Imagine being Drake in this moment. You've dominated for over a decade. You've broken every record. You collaborated with legends. You built a brand that's bigger than music. And then you enter what you think is a winnable battle, a chance to silence critics and prove you're not just a hit maker, but a true MC. And instead, you get dismantled, not just by your opponent, but by the entire culture. And then when you're looking for support, your own circle tells you you were never going to win that fight. That's not just a loss, that's a psychological collapse waiting to happen. That's the kind of moment that makes someone question everything, every decision, every alliance, every assumption about their place in the world. And the internet can feel that energy. The comments, the jokes, the memes, they're not just about the beef anymore. They're about watching a giant realize he's not as untouchable as he thought. The leaked audio clips, the social media reactions, the insider reports, they all paint a picture of someone who's been hit hard by this. People who claim to know Drake's state of mind describe someone who's shaken, someone who believed in his invincibility and now is confronting the reality that the culture doesn't see him the way he sees himself. That's brutal on a human level, regardless of fame or fortune. And here's what makes it even more devastating, the public nature of it all. This isn't a private loss. This isn't something he can process behind closed doors. Every moment of this collapse has been broadcast to millions. The Super Bowl performance, millions watched. The 21 Savage comments, instantly viral. The memes, everywhere. There's no escape, no hiding, just constant, relentless public dissection of his downfall. Fans online have been ruthless, but there's a strange undercurrent of sympathy. Some people are recognizing that what's happening to Drake is a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing your own hype, about surrounding yourself with people who won't tell you the truth, about fighting battles you're not equipped to win. And that's hitting different for a lot of people who've watched Drake's career with admiration. This is somebody's downfall playing out in real time, and the emotional weight of that is heavy.
Whether you're a fan or a critic, watching someone lose not just a battle, but their entire cultural standing is a spectacle that feels both entertaining and deeply unsettling. Because if it can happen to Drake, who seemed untouchable, it can happen to anyone. Now, this whole situation gets even crazier when you start looking at the details that have emerged in the aftermath, because it's not just about one statement from 21, it's about a pattern of evidence that's been building, piece by piece, painting a picture of systematic betrayal and cultural rejection that goes deeper than anyone initially realized. Let's talk about the MC hierarchy that 21 Savage comments subtly exposed. When he framed the situation, he didn't just talk about Drake versus Kendrick, he positioned it as a clash between different types of artists. On one side, you have Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole, elevated as untouchable lyrical purists. On the other, you have Drake, labeled as a hybrid. Now, that might sound like a compliment on the surface. Hybrid suggests versatility, range, crossover appeal, but in the context of real MC warfare, it's code for not one of them. That's a downgrade. That's putting Drake in a separate category, implying that when it comes to pure lyricism, when it comes to the art form in its most respected version, Drake doesn't measure up. And Savage said it so smoothly that it almost sounded like praise, but the hip-hop community caught the subtext immediately. It was a polite way of saying Drake's great at what he does, but what he does isn't what this battle requires.
And the evidence supporting that narrative has been mounting. Fans have been going back through Drake's entire catalog, comparing bars, analyzing lyrics, and making compilations showing where his style differs from traditional battle rap. They're pulling up old interviews where Drake himself admits he's not trying to be the most lyrical, that he's focused on hits and vibes rather than bar-for-bar warfare. And now, those admissions are being used as proof that he was out of his depth in this Kendrick battle from day one. TMZ dropped reports about the inner workings of Drake's camp, and the picture that emerged is troubling. Multiple sources describe an environment where criticism is unwelcome, where tough conversations are avoided, where the priority is keeping Drake comfortable rather than keeping him sharp. That's the yes man problem amplified, and it explains why Drake might have entered this battle with overconfidence, believing his commercial dominance would translate to cultural victory. But it gets even deeper. Let's talk about the numbers, because something strange happened right as this controversy peaked. 21 Savage's album projections, which were initially sitting around 53,000 units, suddenly skyrocketed to 90,000. That's not a normal bump. That's not organic growth. That's a massive, unexplained surge that happened to coincide perfectly with the heightened attention from the Drake situation. Now, nobody's making accusations, nobody's stating anything as fact, but the internet has questions. Fans online started comparing this to other times when album numbers mysteriously jumped during controversy. They started asking whether there's a pattern of using drama to boost sales artificially. They started wondering whether the entire system is more manipulated than we realize. And then came the chart analysis. Online detectives, the same ones who've been dissecting every frame of the Super Bowl performance, turned their attention to streaming numbers, playlist placements, and algorithm behaviors. What they found was fascinating. Certain Drake tracks that had been declining in popularity suddenly got pushes on major playlists right as the Kendrick battle intensified. Coincidence? Strategic positioning? Something else entirely? The speculation is wild, and the evidence, while circumstantial, is mounting. People started pulling up screenshots, comparing chart positions week by week, tracking playlist ads and removals, monitoring social media engagement patterns, and the pattern that emerged suggested a coordinated effort to maintain Drake's appearance of dominance even as his cultural standing was collapsing. It's the kind of thing that, if true, would represent a massive deception. And if not true, it's still evidence of how deeply the audience has lost trust in the authenticity of success metrics. The Pusha T situation got dragged back into the conversation, but with new context. People are now looking at that battle through the lens of this Kendrick war and seeing parallels that are impossible to ignore. The same pattern. Drake enters confidently, gets hit with devastating material, responds inadequately, falls back, controls the narrative through other means rather than through bars. It's almost identical, and that suggests this isn't bad luck or circumstance. This is who Drake is when faced with real lyrical warfare. Industry voices have been louder in recent weeks, and they're not holding back. Producers, fellow artists, music journalists, people who usually stay diplomatic are now openly discussing Drake's limitations as a battle rapper. They're acknowledging what the culture has felt for years, that Drake is incredible at what he does, but what he does isn't traditional hip-hop combat. And when he steps into that arena against someone like Kendrick, who's built for it, the mismatch is obvious. And let's not forget the Super Bowl element, because new details keep emerging. Insiders say that Kendrick's performance was planned months in advance, that every bar was carefully selected for maximum impact, that the entire presentation was designed to be a cultural moment rather than just a performance. This wasn't spontaneous. This was strategic. This was Kendrick and his team executing a plan to publicly claim victory in front of the largest possible audience. Reports suggest that Drake's team was aware of the Super Bowl plans, but underestimated the impact. They thought it would be one performance among many, that it would fade into the noise of a busy news cycle. They didn't anticipate that the culture would embrace it as a defining moment. That miscalculation is now seen as evidence of being out of touch, of not understanding the temperature of the room, of living in an echo chamber that distorted reality. Everything is speculation until someone confirms it, but the weight of circumstantial evidence is becoming impossible to ignore. The pattern is too consistent, the timing is too convenient, the cultural response is too unified, and 21 Savage's comments sit at the center of it all, not as an isolated statement, but as confirmation of everything the evidence has been suggesting, that Drake was fighting a battle he could never win, in a culture that had already decided he was the villain. Meanwhile, as all this main drama is unfolding, there are side stories and layers to this situation that make the whole picture even more complex and fascinating. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening in an industry full of interconnected relationships, old beefs, strategic alliances, and people watching closely to see how this plays out. Let's talk about J. Cole for a second, because his role in this narrative is interesting. Remember, J. Cole was initially part of this battle. He dropped a verse, stepped into the arena, and then pulled out. He apologized. He said he didn't want the smoke. At the time, people clowned him for it. They called him soft. They said he backed down. But now, in the aftermath of Drake's collapse, people are looking at J. Cole's decision differently. They're calling it wisdom. They're saying he read the room, recognized the battle was unwinnable for anyone going against Kendrick, and made the smart choice to preserve his reputation. That's a wild shift in perception, and it speaks to how much the narrative has changed. J. Cole went from being seen as someone who quit to someone who made a strategic retreat, and the contrast with Drake, who stayed in the fight and got destroyed, makes J. Cole look even smarter in hindsight. Some fans are even saying J. Cole tried to warn Drake, tried to signal that this was a battle not worth fighting, but Drake's pride wouldn't let him back down. There's no concrete evidence of that, but the speculation is running wild. People are analyzing old interviews, looking for hints that J. Cole saw this coming. They're watching the moments before J. Cole pulled out, trying to read his body language and energy for clues about his mindset. It's the kind of deep dive investigation that only happens when a story gets this big, when the stakes feel this high. And then there's the broader industry reaction. Other artists have been watching this unfold, and their silence is deafening. In the past, when Drake was involved in beef, you'd see a flood of support, cosign, subliminal posts, strategic features, but this time, crickets. The lack of public support for Drake during this Kendrick battle has been notable, and people are interpreting that as evidence that the industry knows Drake lost, and nobody wants to be associated with the losing side. That's a brutal form of betrayal in itself. Not active sabotage, but passive abandonment. The kind where people who benefited from Drake's success during the good times suddenly disappear when things get rough. And it reinforces the narrative that Drake is isolated, surrounded by people who were loyal to his success rather than loyal to him. And let's also talk about the fans, because their role in this cannot be underestimated. Online communities have been dissecting every aspect of this beef with an intensity that's almost obsessive. Reddit threads with thousands of comments, Twitter spaces going for hours, YouTube breakdown videos getting millions of views. This isn't casual interest. This is a cultural moment where people feel invested in the outcome. And the fan theories are getting wild. Some people think this entire beef was planned as a way to generate publicity for both artists. Others believe there are industry powers manipulating the narrative behind the scenes. Some fans are convinced that Drake will drop a surprise response that changes everything. The speculation ranges from plausible to absolutely insane, but it all contributes to the energy around this story.
There are also side conversations happening about what this means for the future of hip-hop. Is this the moment where the culture rejects commercialism and returns to valuing lyricism above all else? Is this a wake-up call for artists who have prioritized hits over bars? Or is this just a unique situation involving two generational talents and no broader lessons should be drawn? Those debates are happening everywhere, and they're adding layers of meaning to what's already a complex situation. Some industry analysts are pointing to this as a turning point. They're saying that the streaming era created a false equivalency where popularity was confused with greatness, where numbers were seen as the ultimate measure of artistic value. And now the Kendrick versus Drake battle is exposing that fallacy, showing that when you strip away the metrics and focus on pure artistry, the culture still knows how to recognize and celebrate true excellence. As a powerful narrative, and it's gaining traction. People are tired of being told that the most streamed artist is automatically the best artist. They're tired of charts being treated as the final word on quality. And Kendrick's victory, especially the Super Bowl moment, is being embraced as evidence that authenticity and artistry still matter, still resonate, still have the power to move culture in ways that manufactured success cannot. And honestly, whether you agree with that narrative or not, you can't deny its power. It's the kind of story that people want to believe. The underdog purist defeating the commercial giant, the artist beating the businessman, David versus Goliath in a modern hip-hop context. It's compelling, and it's spreading fast.
And this story is still unfolding, with way bigger implications than just one beef between two artists. What we're seeing here is a fundamental conversation about authenticity, loyalty, success metrics, and what it means to be respected in modern hip-hop culture. The Drake and Kendrick battle has become a lens through which we're examining larger questions about the industry, the culture, and the relationship between commercial success and artistic credibility. The bigger conversation is about responsibility. When you're Drake's size, when you have that level of influence, when your decisions impact not just your career, but the entire ecosystem around you, what responsibility do you have to be honest with yourself about your limitations? What responsibility does your team have to protect you from battles you can't win? And what happens when that system fails, when the yes men and the echo chamber lead you into a public disaster? When you constantly position yourself as the greatest, when you spend years building a narrative of invincibility, when you dismiss criticism and double down on confidence, you're not just building a brand, you're creating expectations. You're setting yourself up for a fall if reality doesn't match the image. And Drake's situation is a wild example of what happens when that gap between perception and reality becomes too wide to ignore. The more you isolate yourself in success, the more you surround yourself with people who validate rather than challenge, the more you believe your own mythology, the more vulnerable you become to exactly the kind of cultural rejection we're witnessing right now. It's a warning for anybody with Drake's level of fame and influence. Success can blind you, loyalty can become enabling, and by the time you realize the truth, it might be too late. What's happening to Drake is also raising questions about the media's role in building and destroying legacies. For years, the narrative around Drake was carefully constructed and maintained. Positive stories, strategic leaks, controlled interviews, curated social media presence. It was a machine designed to keep Drake at the top of the conversation in the most flattering light possible. But now that same machine seems to be turning against him, amplifying every mistake, highlighting every weakness, celebrating every blow Kendrick lands. Is that fair? Is that how the game works? Or is it evidence of something darker, where success is temporary and the industry is always looking for the next narrative, the next rise, the next fall? Those questions don't have easy answers, but they're worth asking because they reveal how precarious fame actually is, especially in an era where public opinion can shift instantly based on a single viral moment. The Drake situation is also sparking conversations about mental health in the industry. The pressure of maintaining an image, the stress of constant competition, the isolation that comes with extreme fame. These are real issues that affect artists in ways the public rarely sees, and watching someone experience a very public collapse raises questions about what support systems exist, whether they're adequate, and what responsibility we as an audience have when we participate in building someone up only to tear them down.
Some people argue that Drake chose this life, that the rewards of fame come with the risks of public scrutiny, and that empathy is wasted on someone with his level of wealth and success. Others push back, saying that being rich and famous doesn't make you immune to psychological harm, that public humiliation still hurts regardless of your bank account, and that we should be more thoughtful about how we consume and contribute to these narratives. There's no consensus, but the debate itself is valuable. It's forcing people to think about the human cost of entertainment, the line between critique and cruelty, and whether the culture has become too comfortable with watching people suffer for our amusement. And finally, this whole situation is a case study in how modern media cycles work, the speed at which information spreads, the way narratives form and solidify, the power of social media to amplify certain voices and perspectives. It's all on display here. 20 years ago, a beef like this would have played out over months through album releases and interviews. Now it plays out in hours through tweets, clips, and memes. That acceleration changes everything about how these stories unfold and how they're experienced by audiences. So where does this leave Drake? Where does the story go from here? Because right now, we're in the immediate aftermath of a cultural earthquake, and the ground is still shaking. The dust hasn't settled, the final consequences haven't fully materialized, but the trajectory is becoming clear, and it's not looking good for Drake's cultural standing. Some insiders speculate that Drake will retreat, that he'll pull back from public battles, focus on commercial success where he still dominates, and let time heal the wounds to his reputation. That's the safe play. That's what he did after Pusha. Go quiet, drop hits, remind people why they loved you in the first place, and hope the narrative eventually shifts back in your favor. But others argue that approach won't work this time, that the Super Bowl moment was too big, too definitive, too permanent, that you can't just outlast a cultural rejection of that magnitude, that Drake will need to respond in some way, will need to address this head-on, or risk being forever defined by this defeat. The question is, what could that response possibly look like? What move exists that could counter the narrative that's already been cemented? There's speculation about a surprise album, about a diss track so brutal it reframes everything, about public appearances or interviews where Drake lays out his side of the story. But here's the problem. Once the culture decides you've lost, proving otherwise becomes nearly impossible. You're fighting not just your opponent, but the collective perception of millions of people who've already made their minds. That's the nightmare scenario for any artist, and it's exactly where Drake finds himself right now. Fan theories about Drake's next move are everywhere. Some people think he'll collaborate with unexpected artists to show versatility. Others believe he'll drop a vulnerable album addressing the emotional toll of this battle. Some fans are convinced he's planning a documentary that tells his side of the story. The speculation is endless, and it shows how invested people are in seeing how this story concludes, or if it ever truly does.
And this story is still unfolding, with way bigger implications than just one beef between two artists. What we're seeing here is a fundamental conversation about authenticity, loyalty, success metrics, and what it means to be respected in modern hip-hop culture. The Drake and Kendrick battle has become a lens through which we're examining larger questions about the industry, the culture, and the relationship between commercial success and artistic credibility. The bigger conversation is about responsibility. When you're Drake's size, when you have that level of influence, when your decisions impact not just your career, but the entire ecosystem around you, what responsibility do you have to be honest with yourself about your limitations? What responsibility does your team have to protect you from battles you can't win? And what happens when that system fails, when the yes men and the echo chamber lead you into a public disaster? When you constantly position yourself as the greatest, when you spend years building a narrative of invincibility, when you dismiss criticism and double down on confidence, you're not just building a brand, you're creating expectations. You're setting yourself up for a fall if reality doesn't match the image. And Drake's situation is a wild example of what happens when that gap between perception and reality becomes too wide to ignore.
The more you isolate yourself in success, the more you surround yourself with people who validate rather than challenge, the more you believe your own mythology, the more vulnerable you become to exactly the kind of cultural rejection we're witnessing right now. It's a warning for anybody with Drake's level of fame and influence. Success can blind you, loyalty can become enabling, and by the time you realize the truth, it might be too late. What's happening to Drake is also raising questions about the media's role in building and destroying legacies. For years, the narrative around Drake was carefully constructed and maintained. Positive stories, strategic leaks, controlled interviews, curated social media presence. It was a machine designed to keep Drake at the top of the conversation in the most flattering light possible. But now that same machine seems to be turning against him, amplifying every mistake, highlighting every weakness, celebrating every blow Kendrick lands. Is that fair? Is that how the game works? Or is it evidence of something darker, where success is temporary and the industry is always looking for the next narrative, the next rise, the next fall? Those questions don't have easy answers, but they're worth asking because they reveal how precarious fame actually is, especially in an era where public opinion can shift instantly based on a single viral moment. The Drake situation is also sparking conversations about mental health in the industry. The pressure of maintaining an image, the stress of constant competition, the isolation that comes with extreme fame. These are real issues that affect artists in ways the public rarely sees, and watching someone experience a very public collapse raises questions about what support systems exist, whether they're adequate, and what responsibility we as an audience have when we participate in building someone up only to tear them down. Some people argue that Drake chose this life, that the rewards of fame come with the risks of public scrutiny, and that empathy is wasted on someone with his level of wealth and success. Others push back, saying that being rich and famous doesn't make you immune to psychological harm, that public humiliation still hurts regardless of your bank account, and that we should be more thoughtful about how we consume and contribute to these narratives. There's no consensus, but the debate itself is valuable. It's forcing people to think about the human cost of entertainment, the line between critique and cruelty, and whether the culture has become too comfortable with watching people suffer for our amusement. And finally, this whole situation is a case study in how modern media cycles work. The speed at which information spreads, the way narratives form and solidify, the power of social media to amplify certain voices and perspectives. It's all on display here. 20 years ago, a beef like this would have played out over months through album releases and interviews. Now it plays out in hours through tweets, clips, and memes. That acceleration changes everything about how these stories unfold and how they're experienced by audiences. So where does this leave Drake? Where does the story go from here? Because right now, we're in the immediate aftermath of a cultural earthquake, and the ground is still shaking. The dust hasn't settled, the final consequences haven't fully materialized, but the trajectory is becoming clear, and it's not looking good for Drake's cultural standing. Some insiders speculate that Drake will retreat, that he'll pull back from public battles, focus on commercial success where he still dominates, and let time heal the wounds to his reputation. That's the safe play. That's what he did after Pusha. Go quiet, drop hits, remind people why they loved you in the first place, and hope the narrative eventually shifts back in your favor. But others argue that approach won't work this time, that the Super Bowl moment was too big, too definitive, too permanent, that you can't just outlast a cultural rejection of that magnitude, that Drake will need to respond in some way, will need to address this head-on, or risk being forever defined by this defeat. The question is, what could that response possibly look like? What move exists that could counter the narrative that's already been cemented? There's speculation about a surprise album, about a diss track so brutal it reframes everything, about public appearances or interviews where Drake lays out his side of the story. But here's the problem. Once the culture decides you've lost, proving otherwise becomes nearly impossible. You're fighting not just your opponent, but the collective perception of millions of people who've already made their minds. That's the nightmare scenario for any artist, and it's exactly where Drake finds himself right now.
Fan theories about Drake's next move are everywhere. Some people think he'll collaborate with unexpected artists to show versatility. Others believe he'll drop a vulnerable album addressing the emotional toll of this battle. Some fans are convinced he's planning a documentary that tells his side of the story. The speculation is endless, and it shows how invested people are in seeing how this story concludes, or if it ever truly does.
There's also speculation about legal moves, about whether Drake's team might pursue action against people spreading certain narratives or making specific claims. It's a risky strategy because it can make you look weak, like you're using lawyers to fight battles you can't win artistically. But when reputation damage reaches a certain level, some people argue that legal protection becomes necessary. The question of loyalty is also hanging in the air. Will more people from Drake's circle make statements like 21 Savage did? Will we see a flood of support that actually undermines him further? Or will people distance themselves entirely, leaving Drake to face this alone? The dynamics of fame and friendship are being tested in real time, and the outcome will reveal a lot about the true nature of Drake's relationships in the industry. And then there's the legacy question. Years from now, when people look back at Drake's career, will this Kendrick battle be a footnote or a defining moment? Will he be remembered primarily for his hits and commercial dominance, or will this cultural rejection overshadow everything else? Those are the stakes right now. That's what's being decided in the court of public opinion as we speak. Some fans remain loyal, arguing that Drake's body of work speaks for itself, that one loss doesn't erase a decade of excellence, that the culture is being too harsh and letting a single battle define an entire legacy unfairly. But those voices are being drowned out by the overwhelming tide of people who believe this battle exposed fundamental truths about Drake's place in hip-hop that can't be ignored or explained away. The uncertainty is part of what makes this story so compelling. We're watching in real time as a legacy gets rewritten, as a narrative that seemed solid for years suddenly crumbles, as someone who seemed untouchable becomes vulnerable. And nobody knows exactly how this ends, which keeps everyone watching, speculating, and waiting for the next development. Stay locked in because this story is absolutely about to get even crazier. We're not even close to the end of this saga. More details are dropping daily. More clues are surfacing hourly. More reactions are coming from people who've stayed silent until now. And reports say that major developments are coming in the next few weeks that could completely change how we understand this entire situation. Industry insiders are whispering about response tracks, about private conversations that might go public, about alliances shifting and new players entering the conversation. The chess game is still active, and the next few moves could be game-changing, so you cannot afford to miss what's coming next. So drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think Drake can recover from this? Do you think 21 Savage's statement was betrayal or honesty? Do you believe the culture was fair to Drake, or was this a setup from the beginning? And what do you think Drake's next move should be? Should he respond aggressively? Should he fall back? Should he address this in his music or stay silent and let his success speak for itself? I want to hear every perspective because this community is what makes covering stories like this so incredible. Your insights, your theories, your passion for hip-hop, that's what turns a news story into a cultural conversation. So don't hold back. Let me know exactly how you're feeling about this entire situation. And listen, if you've made it this far in the video, you're clearly invested in this story. So do me a huge favor, hit that like button right now, smash that subscribe button, and turn on those post notifications so you don't miss a single update, because we are covering every twist, every turn, every development as this story continues to unfold. This is the kind of moment that defines careers, that shapes legacies, that changes how we understand hip-hop culture, and you're witnessing it in real time. That's powerful, that's historic, and I'm honored to be breaking this down with you, bringing you the analysis, the context, and the insights you won't find anywhere else. I appreciate you for rocking with me through this entire deep dive. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your engagement. And I appreciate that you trust me to deliver the real story, not just the surface level headlines. That means everything to me. And it's what keeps me motivated to bring you the best content possible. I'll see you in the next one. And trust me, you're going to want to be here for what's coming. Stay safe out there, stay informed, and remember, in the world of fame, success, and hip-hop, nothing is permanent. Today's king can be tomorrow's cautionary tale. So stay humble, stay real, and never forget that the culture always has the final word. Peace.